They didn't even look up when I placed the letter on Brad's desk. It landed softly, almost politely, like it was asking permission to exist, while he finished sipping from his thermos and clicking through unread emails. The paper sat there for a long second, quiet and patient, before he finally glanced down. His jaw tightened just a fraction, barely noticeable, before he leaned back in his chair like this was routine, like someone resigning after nearly 2 decades was just another box to check. From across the room, Chelsea didn't bother lowering her voice. "You're finally giving up?" she said, loud enough to echo off the cubicle walls. "About time." I didn't respond. I wasn't here to spar. I wasn't here to perform dignity for people who had already decided I didn't deserve it. My name is Marianne. I'm 59 years old, and for the last 17 years, I worked as a logistics coordinator at Northern College and Freight in Columbus, Ohio. Or I did, right up until this morning. It hadn't always been like this. Brad hadn't always been this smug, this hollow. I trained him when he first started, fresh out of school, fumbling through load sheets and asking me where to find carrier codes. Chelsea came later, sharp and quick, all confidence and ambition wrapped in glossy hair and corporate buzzwords. She had talent, I'll give her that, but things shifted after the promotion. 2 months ago, Brad was elevated to head of route operations, and Chelsea slid neatly into his orbit like she'd been waiting for gravity to change. Suddenly, every problem had my name on it: late deliveries, fuel overages, paperwork discrepancies. Never mind that I'd been cleaning up their messes quietly for months. "You know," Chelsea went on, leaning against her desk and flipping her hair, "most people your age don't even stick around this long. Guess some folks just need a little push." Brad laughed, the kind of laugh meant to signal agreement without responsibility. I looked at them, then down at the folders spread across Brad's desk. Invoices waiting on follow-up, vendor disputes unresolved, delivery notes missing approvals. All mine. All things I'd handled while Brad ducked out early for softball games and Chelsea disappeared for long lunches. "Make sure you turn in your key card," Brad said, already turning back to his screen. "Already did," I replied. "Lockers cleared, too." "You didn't have to rush," Chelsea said sweetly. "We could have done something for you. Cupcakes in the break room or something." That made Brad smirk. I saw it, I ignored it. I held my bag, held my silence, and let them enjoy their victory lap. I'd been dismissed before, but this time I knew it was final. I walked out through the warehouse doors for the last time, sunlight cutting sharp across the loading bay. My feet ached from years of 12-hour shifts. My back still carried the weight of third-shift dispatches Brad used to quietly slide onto my workload. When I stepped off company property, I didn't cry, not even close. Let them whisper about outdated methods and early retirement. The only thing I left behind was the invisible scaffolding holding their operation upright, and I wasn't planning to stick around to watch it wobble. Not yet. I sat in my car for over an hour that afternoon, parked far out in the Kroger lot, keys still in the ignition. The AC gave up long before I did. I stared through the windshield, hands folded in my lap, letting the reality settle. It wasn't a surprise, it had been coming, but knowing and living it are different things. I used to like that job. I was good at it. I knew which back roads saved miles, which haulers answered their phones after hours, how to trace a delay in under 10 minutes. There was respect in that once, not applause, just recognition. Lately, though, it felt like I was being erased cell by cell in a spreadsheet. Brad started it. A few weeks after his promotion, he dropped a stack of urgent route reassignments on my desk at 4:52 on a Friday. "Need these by Monday," he said, already halfway out the door. Chelsea followed with quieter cuts. "Oh, I thought Marianne handled that. Didn't you sign off on that vendor delay?" She always laughed when she said it, like it was harmless, but it was deliberate, polished enough to make me look defensive if I pushed back. One afternoon, while I was buried in mileage logs with 2 haulers on hold, Chelsea walked by holding a latte and smirked. "You're still on that?" she asked. "No offense, but this department moves faster now." I stayed late that night, not because I had to, but because I couldn't stand carrying that smirk home with me. That's when it clicked. They weren't ignoring me, they were setting me up. The fuel reports Brad flagged weren't proof of misuse. They were proof I was covering third-shift dispatches, his assignments, Chelsea's missed check-ins, all logged under my name because I was the one actually doing the work. The delays traced back to misconfirmations Chelsea had made, but my initials were attached to the manifests. They weren't pushing me out because I was failing. They were pushing me out because I was inconvenient. I knew too much, I fixed too much, I remembered too much. The email came a few days later. Subject line, brief with President Westbrook. No explanation, just a calendar invite and a note to bring performance documentation. I accepted. The new president had only been around a few months. Polite smile, practiced handshake, no real curiosity. Rumor said he got the role after his father stepped down. The founder knew every route by memory. This one probably relied on dashboards. I arrived early. Brad and Chelsea were already in the conference room. Brad stood up when I entered like it was his show. "There she is," he said brightly. Chelsea smiled thin. "Thanks for coming, Marianne." President Westbrook barely looked up from his tablet. "Let's keep this brief," he said. He referenced troubling performance data, fuel spikes, delays, supplier complaints. Brad slid charts across the table. Chelsea added commentary like seasoning. The numbers were real. The story wasn't. I explained what I could: shift reassignments, overtime coverage, mislogged routes. Westbrook asked who misassigned them. I paused. Brad and Chelsea were ready. I wasn't, not in the way that mattered here. They lied smoothly. Rotated assignments, voluntary overtime, seniority accommodation. Westbrook folded his hands. "This doesn't look good, Marianne, but given your tenure, we're offering you a graceful exit, retirement package, clean file." I understood what it was, a request dressed up as mercy. I accepted, not because they were right, but because dignity doesn't survive in rigged rooms. I spent the next 2 days wrapping up things no one asked me to finish. Brad sent a generic thank you email with an HR link. Chelsea didn't say goodbye. I drove to Schneider Freight first. Roy met me outside, clipboard in hand. "Retired, huh?" "Something like that," I said. He nodded. "That's gonna be a weird Monday." We stood there quietly. No speeches, just understanding. I visited 3 more haulers, left cards, shook hands, stayed professional. For everyone else, I wrote letters. Real ones, ink and paper, explaining I was leaving, who to contact next. I made sure nothing fell apart immediately. One went to Terry at Harland Truck Lines, another to the warehouse lead at Harmon Supply. Each letter explained I'd be leaving the company and gave a contact for follow-up. I wish them well. I thanked them for their years of trust. I didn't mention Brad or Chelsea or the trap they laid. Some stories don't need to be told twice. The smart ones would figure it out soon enough. On my last official morning, I walked out of that building at exactly 9 a.m. The parking lot looked the same, stained asphalt puddles from a broken drain, but it felt different, like someone had cut a rope I didn't realize had been pulling me backwards for years. Brad offered a firm handshake at the door. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Chelsea stood behind him, arms folded, eyebrows raised, like she was already wondering how long until she could claim my office. I didn't say a word to either of them, just nodded once, then turned and left. That evening, I sat on my porch wrapped in an old blanket, watching the sun dip behind the trees. No more overnight calls, no more passive digs, no more fixing problems I didn't create. For the first time in years, the quiet felt like peace. A week later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. At first, I thought it was spam. A couple missed calls from a blocked number, a voicemail with no message. I ignored it. I was halfway through a puzzle book on my front porch, sipping coffee, letting my dog Ruby nap across my feet. Then came a call from a number I recognized, the main line at Northern College. I let it go to voicemail. Another call came through immediately. This time, I answered. "Marianne?" a voice said, slightly breathless. "Speaking." "This is President Westbrook." His voice had lost the steady calm he used in meetings. "I hope this isn't a bad time, but I need to ask something." There was a pause, like he didn't know how to start. Or maybe he was hoping I'd jump in and save him the trouble. "Do you know why multiple supplier contracts are on the verge of collapse?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" We've had over a dozen vendors either delay or walk back agreements. 2 of our haulers pulled their availability indefinitely. Nobody's responding to Chelsea's follow-ups. And Brad's scrambling. I held the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a second. This couldn't be real. "You're asking if I know why people aren't working with you?" I said slowly. "Yes, no, not accusing. It's just there were notes in the files you left, but no context. We underestimated your role in those relationships." I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding with something between amusement and disbelief. I finished all my paperwork. Every handoff was documented. "I'm not saying you didn't," he added quickly, "but it seems like many of these suppliers were personally invested in working with you. Some of them said they didn't trust the new points of contact. Did you expect they'd be fine with someone who didn't know their driver's routes, their preferences, their holidays?" I said. He didn't answer right away. I could hear voices behind him, urgent, panicked. I took a long breath. "You took a woman who ran your back-end operations for 17 years and treated her like overhead. Now you're surprised the machine's grinding? Would you consider coming in?" he asked. "Just for a few hours to help stabilize things." I glanced at the dog, still asleep on my feet, the half-done puzzle on my lap. Curiosity stirred. "Maybe," I said, "but only to watch the fireworks." I walked into the office just before noon. The place looked different, not in any obvious way. Same desks, same hum of printers and dispatch radios, but the energy had shifted. Tense, frantic, like a ship still technically afloat, but clearly taking on water. Chelsea was at her desk, hunched over her monitor. Her hair was pulled back tight, her face pale and pinched. Brad stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot. Neither of them looked up until I spoke. "Was this how you pictured it going?" Chelsea flinched. Brad turned around like he'd seen a ghost. "You," he said, voice low. "Good to see you too," I replied. Chelsea stood up, her expression twisting into something bitter. "You think this is funny? You sabotaged the company." I raised an eyebrow. "Sabotage? That's a big word for someone who couldn't keep track of 3 standing hauler contracts without help." Brad stepped forward. "Don't play innocent. You left without a proper transition. You poisoned our vendors against us. You told them not to trust us." I crossed my arms. Did I? Or did they just decide they didn't want to deal with 2 people who can't tell the difference between a quarterly route log and a fuel discrepancy report? Chelsea scoffed. "You're full of yourself." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I just did my job every day, quietly, thoroughly. You just never noticed until I stopped doing it." Brad's face turned red. "We've had to call in backups, rework schedules. We're bleeding money." "That sounds rough," I said dryly, almost like someone should have respected the institutional knowledge of the person holding it all together. A door opened down the hall. President Westbrook appeared, motioning toward me. "She's here," he said, like I was a package that finally arrived. He led us into the conference room. I walked past Brad and Chelsea without another glance. Inside, the president looked tired. His sleeves were rolled up, papers were spread across the table, some marked with red pen. "We're in a bind," he admitted, "and I've heard from multiple vendors that their trust was with you, not the company, not our name." "You," I nodded. "I built those relationships, customized schedules, adjusted hauls to accommodate weather patterns, driver families, holidays, even down bridges. I didn't just move shipments, I moved people." He leaned back. "They won't even answer our calls." "Of course not. They don't know you," I said. Then I glanced at Brad and Chelsea, and they definitely don't trust them. Chelsea bristled. "That's not fair." "Don't," I said, calmly but firmly. "You spent months trying to cut me out. You didn't understand what I did, and you didn't care to learn. Now you want to blame me because the company depended on someone you never respected." President Westbrook looked at me. "Quiet. I'm not here to rescue you," I said. "I just wanted to see what things looked like without me, and from where I was standing, they looked like a mess." The room was still when the call came through. President Westbrook's cell phone buzzed quietly on the table mid-sentence. He glanced at the screen and immediately excused himself, muttering, "It's my father, I need to take this." He stepped out into the hallway and shut the door behind him. Brad sank into a chair across the table, rubbing his temples. Chelsea stood stiffly by the window, arms crossed, like she was bracing against a storm she hadn't expected to hit so hard. I stayed where I was, arms crossed, watching them like someone watching the end of a bad play. They looked small now, tired, but I wasn't moved, not anymore. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When the door finally opened again, President Westbrook came back in slowly. His face looked different, not panicked, not frustrated, thoughtful. He took his seat and looked at me. "My father says hello." I nodded. "Tell him I said the same." There was a pause before he continued. "He told me something I didn't know. Apparently, 3 of our oldest vendor contracts only stayed on board because of you. They called him directly last week, asked if there was any chance you'd come back." Chelsea shifted on her feet. Brad looked up sharply. "He said they praised your professionalism, your consistency." One guy said, "You once rerouted a delivery in a snowstorm just to make sure his drivers got home for Christmas Eve." I remember. I said that was Phil from Calgrove. His youngest was in the school play that night. The president's expression softened. "My father told me you were the reason this company had any stability these last 5 years, that every time a merger failed or a new system rollout flopped, you were the one who quietly held the network together." He let out a long breath. And for the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely humbled. "He regrets how your resignation was handled," he said, "and so do I." Brad opened his mouth like he wanted to object, but the president raised a hand without even looking at him. "Mary Ann," he said, meeting my eyes, "we made a mistake, a big one. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you your position back with full authority to rebuild your team your way. You name the conditions." I felt Chelsea's eyes burning into me. Brad stared at the floor, but I didn't answer right away. Not out of pride, just because I needed to let that moment breathe. 17 years of being taken for granted, and now, finally, they saw me. I leaned back slowly in my chair and said, "I'll think about it." The silence after my words hung thick in the air. "I'll think about it," I'd said. And suddenly the room felt like it was waiting for the next shoe to drop. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "With all due respect," he began, his voice trembling just slightly at the edges, "I don't think this is the time to be making big changes. We need stability, not rewrites of established process." Chelsea jumped in, trying to sound composed. "Exactly. Letting Mary Ann take over would only confuse the team. Things are already delicate. It's not personal." President Westbrook didn't even look at her. Instead, he slid a thin folder across the table toward me. "Before you think too hard about returning," he said to me, "you should know we've initiated a full internal audit. I ordered it the day after the vendor calls started coming in. I needed to know exactly how the breakdown happened." I opened the folder. It was all there. Printed expense reports, time-stamped route edits, duplicate entries on vendor logs, all tied back to Brad and Chelsea. One page listed the work Brad had rerouted to my account, dozens of late-night dispatches, mileage overages, manual time entry edits with no authorization trail. Another showed Chelsea had filed performance summaries with discrepancies, most notably forged timestamps on dock entries I hadn't touched. And then there were the emails, dozens of internal messages recovered by IT, snide remarks, "Mary Ann's slipping, she'll either quit or get replaced. Either way, we win." One thread included a forwarded HR complaint Chelsea never submitted, drafted but left in her drafts folder, painting me as aggressive and resistant to change. I set the folder down slowly. "I trusted both of you," the president said, now looking at Brad and Chelsea.
I gave you autonomy. I assumed the rising costs were systems issues, but you manipulated reports, misrepresented performance, and actively worked to push out a senior employee who had more experience and trust than either of you combined. Chelsea's mouth dropped open. I didn't forge anything. I read the audit, he cut in. I saw the security footage. You accessed Marianne's dashboard on 3 different nights after she'd logged out. That's a termination offense. Brad slammed his hand on the table. You're going to take her word over ours? She walked out. No, Westbrook said coldly. I'm taking the word of the audit, the vendors, and my father, who said firing her might have been the worst decision this company made in a decade. Brad started to protest, but the president had already turned to the HR rep who just entered the room with a clipboard. Please walk Mr. Adams and Miss Reeves through their exit process, he said, effective immediately. Chelsea's voice cracked. You can't do this. You falsified internal records, manipulated shift logs, and violated our code of conduct by hiding a relationship. He paused, then added, Yes, we know about that too. Brad's married, Chelsea. HR found the texts. I don't care what you do on your own time, but lying about it to staff and using it to consolidate control over team dynamics, that's over the line. They both froze, speechless. Desperation etched across their faces as security arrived. They were still pleading when the door closed behind them. The next few weeks were oddly quiet, peaceful even. I didn't go back to Northern College, at least not as an employee, but I did sit down with President Westbrook for one final conversation. He asked if I'd be open to helping with the transition, not in an official capacity, more like a behind-the-scenes consultant. I said I'd consider it, but only after I finished something important. A few days later, I sent him a report of my own. It was detailed, organized, and damning. In it, I laid out a pattern Brad and Chelsea had been using for years, not just with me, but with others. 3 junior coordinators had mysteriously quit in the last year alone, all after being placed under Brad's supervision. I documented vague performance reviews, reassignments without consent, last-minute schedule swaps designed to set people up for failure. I'd saved everything, memos, emails, even handwritten notes from vendor complaints that were never escalated. When Westbrook finished reading, he looked up at me and said, "We owe you more than just an apology." "Start with accountability," I said. That same week, the company filed to recover misallocated funds from Brad's department, thousands of dollars in over-reported overtime, falsified expense claims, and missing documentation that had been quietly buried in his digital folders. Then the personal consequences began. Word spread fast in the logistics world. It's not a flashy industry, but it's tightly knit. By the time Brad applied for a job at Midco Transport, a firm where I still had friends, his reputation had already reached them. They didn't call him back. Chelsea tried to land a role at a regional brokerage company in Cincinnati. They gave her a preliminary phone interview, then ghosted her after checking her references. I wasn't involved in that part, not directly, but the industry talks. People ask around. I heard Brad's wife left him a month after the termination, took the kids, and filed for divorce. Turns out she found out about Chelsea the same way the rest of us did, through the audit. Chelsea tried to reach me once, sent an email, long-winded, rambling, said she made mistakes, that she didn't realize how much people respected me, that she never meant it to go that far. She asked if I'd speak to someone on her behalf, put in a good word, help her get back on her feet. I read the email twice, then I wrote one sentence back. You made your choices. That was it. No lectures, no pity, just the truth. I didn't send anything to Brad. There wasn't a point. Some people need silence more than a response. And me, I had my dignity, my name, my peace. Turns out that's worth more than a title or a corner office. It's worth everything.
I turned the company down. President Westbrook sent a formal offer 2 days after Chelsea and Brad were walked out. Salary bump, full autonomy over routing strategy, even the option to rebuild my own team from scratch. I told him I appreciated the gesture. I meant it. But no, I'd given Northern College 17 years. That was enough. Instead, I took a different call, one I'd been putting off for a while. My friend Paula ran a freight consulting firm out of Dayton, small but growing. She'd offered me a spot years ago, back when I was still knee-deep in vendor logs and employee reshuffles. "You sure you're ready to leave all that chaos behind?" she joked when I called. "Ready is not the word," I said. "I think I've earned something quieter." Working with Paula was like remembering how to breathe. Flexible hours, no egos, no spreadsheets disguised as power plays. Just logistics. Honest, efficient, tailored. The stuff I actually loved. We'd sit in her office and map out regional routes for family-run trucking companies, designing plans that saved fuel and let their drivers make it home by dinner. No undercutting, no backstabbing, just good work done right. For the first time in decades, I took afternoons off. I walked my dog. I started gardening again. I even went to a book club once, though I didn't say much, just listened. That was enough. Then one Saturday morning, while sketching out a route system for a new client, I realized something. I didn't just want to help someone else run a company. I wanted to build my own. Not some sprawling corporate empire, just a tight, honest operation, a logistics advisory office with integrity, one that didn't treat people like parts to be swapped and thrown out. So I started working on a plan. Nothing flashy, just scribbles in a notebook, spreadsheets on my own terms, a list of old contacts who still picked up when they saw my name. The past was behind me, not forgotten, but behind. Northern College would survive, maybe even thrive, with the right people in place. I had no interest in watching them try. Let Brad and Chelsea figure out what it feels like to start over from the bottom. Let the company learn what it means to value someone before they're halfway out the door. As for me, I wasn't looking back. My second life had already begun.